Welcome, everyone, to the MMA Happy Hour podcast. I am Kyle Anthony, your host for today. We are talking UFC 318, headlined by Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. We're going to be breaking down four plays here on the show today. Now, last weekend, man, Chitty Njokuani shit the bed. He did. He shit the bed for us. Not happy about that overall, but we have a massive card coming up for us this Saturday. We do have a 5% max bet play up right now. This particular wager, 75% hit rate. I'm feeling great about the card right now. Do have four plays locked in for clients. If you want to become a client, link down below. And with that being said, we are going to right away dive into the main event of the evening between Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. Now, we've got this line sitting minus 130 for Max. On the comeback here, we've got Dustin plus 110. Now, this fight is for the BMF title. Not sure if you heard about it, but we have the novelty title, the BMF title, coming up on Saturday night as the main event. And this will be the trilogy between Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. Now, I don't know if it's a trilogy overall because right now it's 2-0 in the series for Dustin Poirier. Now, when you're looking at this fight here, and you want to break down styles, fights, past fights, the one thing you can't do in this fight is really go back and look at their two past fights. You've got Dustin, obviously, goes out there, gets the victory, but you've got one that's back in 2012 where Dustin goes out there and gets the submission victory. And then you also have in 2019, he won by decision. So, not much you can really fully take away from that. Different ages, it's too far back in time at this particular point. And, I kind of am looking at this fight as really, it's like their first time really fighting. I think that's kind of how you got to look at this fight overall. But when you're looking at this fight here, I think the first thing that really sticks out here is it's going to be really a matchup between, Max's high volume output and Dustin Poirier's power. And that's, I think, really, that's the make or break in this fight here. Max, is a well-rounded guy, but he's going to come forward. He's going to push out that volume. And we've seen it consistently throughout his career. It's something that, he's just going to put something out there. He's just going to put enough out there, touch you, go, something for you to think about, something for you to react to. And I think that has worked out, obviously, very well for him here. And not only that, but it's just nonstop. Again, he's going to put out that volume. He's not going to throw everything with 100% power. He's just going to put out enough for you to think about, outland you. And yes, he's, primarily really has been a point fighter where he can just outland and overwhelm opponents with that volume and with that relentless striking pace. Now, he does have the cardio to obviously keep pushing forward, and so does Dustin. So that's kind of a mute point, I think, in this spot here. But one of the things that I do think does stick out a little bit more compared to obviously the volume and the power between these two, but the fact that I do like that Max mixes up his combinations a little bit better. You don't really see, as much from Dustin kicks. You're not really seeing much of that. Yes, he's going to jump a gilly once in a while, or he's, going to do shit like that. But, you look at Max and, he's going to have, he's going to throw a 1-2 and end with a leg kick. He's going to throw a body kick. He's going to mix it up a little bit. And I do like that. I do think that at this point here, we're looking at, Dustin now 36 years old. You've got, Max at 33. And yes, it's not the widest range, but you've got a guy still who's just 33 years old. And what I also, when you're looking at kind of breaking it down, yes, Dustin is a fan favorite. Let's say that, credit to Dustin, hopefully he enjoys retirement, has had a, fantastic career, has had so many wars. But one of the things here is it is his retirement. You've got to put that in there, is that this is his retirement fight. Now, to say how, normally when I'm looking at fights, I am super fading retired fighters, fighters that are going in there saying it's their last fight. I normally just want to stay away from that. Now, I say it's a little bit different here for Dustin because Dustin, I don't think he's a washed version. I don't think he's at the, he just doesn't have anything left. I think he's going to consistently, if he wanted to, he could probably compete for 2 more years, not win a title, but beat some high-level guys, so I do think he does have that, still in him. Sounds like he's made enough money outside of the UFC, so it's not like, he really needs to continue fight. He's had a long career, a legendary career, but It is his retirement fight. And I don't like that. I think that's part of it. Could it be the fact that he's kind of, second guessing his skill set, starting to see his own, performance starting to dwindle a little bit? I think that's part of it as well. But you also got to put in the fact that he is on the wrong side of 35 years old. And that also is part of this here. We know, especially in these lighter weight classes, skills can diminish very quickly. We've seen it a lot of times here. We saw Calvin Kattar recently. It's like you can see these guys who, once they start to hit a certain age, it just starts to go the other way. Not that they're completely done, but you can see that these edges that they do have against certain fighters may not be there anymore. Some of the edges that Dustin had over Max may not be there anymore. And I think that is a big problem here when you're looking at it. And also, you look at it is, I do think that, Dustin, is starting to slow down. And I think we are seeing that, as of course, yes, he's fighting high level guys and that kind of stuff. But I think we are seeing that a little bit where the combinations are developing as quick. He's always going to be tough. He's always going to be a gamer. He's always going to be pushing forward, throwing big shots. But I think that Max, we are seeing him, slightly get a little bit better, and even the Topuria fight, I get it. The guy lost by knockout, but he was very competitive for 3 rounds against the pound for pound best fighter on the planet. And he was and doing the things I'm saying. He was mixing it up, kicking the front leg, working the angles, having that good distance management, pushing out the volume. And it did at a point, I think, was Topuria was not struggling, because that's too strong of a word. But I think it was a little bit problematic for him there. And that's where Topuria just started to get his reads and started to say, hey, I am absolutely coming forward and throwing heavy shots. And boy, did he. He got the finish. But also, you got to add in the fact that even prior to that, even against, Justin Gaethje against Max, that was a spot where everybody thought, oh man, not everyone, can't talk for everybody, but we did have where, people were kind of looking at Gaethje and saying that power is going to be too much. And that's always been really where Dustin, in the prior fights, a lot of it was Dustin had that power advantage where, Max may land a couple shots and all of a sudden Dustin throws the big shots, and really you could see the impact completely different from Max. And I think now that Max is kind of, he's had years, I think that he's really starting to build out his frame. He looks a lot better. I think he looks a lot, more built into the weight class here compared to some of these other fights that he has had up a weight class and moving around. I do think it fits him a little bit better here. And I do think that, you even had the Gaethje fight, he landed 181 significant strikes and then got the knockout. This is a spot here where I do like Max Holloway. I think that, minus 130, numbers starting to get a little bit wider. We are seeing like minus 140s out there and a little bit, minus 142. But I do like Max here. I think that he's more closer to his prime. I think that he's going to have some advantages here. I think the volume will be there. But this is going to be an absolutely fantastic fight here overall. But I am going Max Holloway minus 130 to get the job done. Next one here we're going to go is going to be Brendan Allen. He is minus 205 on the comeback. We've got Marvin Vettori. He's plus 170. Now, you got Allen here. Well, the first thing here is the fact that these guys fought in a casino in Las Vegas. So, whatever that may be, they went out there and they saw both of them. Allen moves forward. He throws, some kind of wild combination. Nothing really happened. It was more of a little bit of a tussle there, but we get to see it now in the cage. Now, odds-wise, I do believe this is wide. Out the gate here, I do believe this line is wide here, and I'm kind of surprised a little bit here. And I think that Vettori, he's not great at anything, but he's good at a lot of things. And the style at which he fights, I think, brings a lot of problems here to Allen, particularly just the way that he fights. Now, you've got Vettori, who's going to move forward. He's going to look to, take punches to the face. He's got a blockhead. He's going to come forward, but he's going to not stop pressuring. He's going to stay in your face. He's going to grind you up against the fence. He's going to hold you there a little bit. He's going to push you up against the fence again. He's going to look for a takedown. He's going to just stay in your face. He's going to stay working. He's going to cage push. He's going to try to win in the clinch a little bit. And those are the kind of things when you're looking at him kind of, grinding out rounds, is I do think that works very well against Brendan Allen. Now, Allen, the other side here, yes, he's a well-rounded guy. We know that, his striking, it continues to get better. He continues to improve some of those things. And we are seeing that. And, on the ground, he definitely has high-level jiu-jitsu, submission ability. I mean, if he gets to your back, we've seen him. He can consistently get the rear naked choke, lock that in. So he does have that. And he does have some of those things. But the issue here for me is the fact that he can slow down. And against somebody like Vettori, who's going to really push that pace, stay in your face, not give you room to breathe, smother you, that can start to really dwindle down that gas tank of Brendan Allen. Now, many times, again, we see him in that first round. He can be somewhat explosive. He's finding some opportunities for takedowns. He's looking to, submission hunt. He's throwing some nice combinations, and it just really starts to slow down. Now, the other part about this is just not only the fact that he can slow down, but also the fact that, if the fight isn't going his way, man, does he start to wilt. He definitely starts to just not look for the exit, but he can really start to backpedal more. He starts to question things. He starts to make bad decisions. We've seen his fight IQ is not really the greatest in certain spots. So it's a guy that can kind of slow down, a guy that can maybe wilt a little bit too, who can make bad decisions. And then on top of that, I think his durability is a little suspect. I think that he doesn't absorb shots very well. I don't think that he's a guy that, nobody likes to get hit, but I think that he really that can start to add to the cardio starting to dwindle, the wilt starting to come in, the durability is fading. And I think at this price here, when you're talking about, over 2-1 favorite, there's a lot of issues here, I think, on the Allen side. And again, it's not that Vettori, has some spectacular skill set, but I do think he's got some paths here. And the way that he fights is going to be that pressure and weaponize that cardio and stay in the face of Brendan Allen. And I do think that he can bully out. I think that he can work in the clinch. I think he can, positionally win, bank some rounds, maybe look for a takedown, and he has that some heavy top pressure. He can kind of keep him there. Now, Allen, obviously on the ground, he's going to have the ability to find, sink something in or threaten some submissions overall. But I don't really believe that Allen on his own will get the fight to the ground. I think he's going to struggle getting the fight to the ground. I think he absolutely needs to get this fight to the ground to find success. Because I think that Vettori staying in his face is really going to make him struggle a lot here. And I think that the pace is really going to be a lot as well. And I do think there is, a little bit of recency bias on the side of Vettori because of his most recent fight against Roman Dolidze. And that was a bad fight. There's no doubt. And I think that's why this line is sitting where it's at. The fact that he's going to be such a big underdog. But yes, it wasn't a good look. He would look very flat out there. You had Dolidze basically throwing just big overhands. He wasn't really doing too much. He wasn't really adapting to anything, and he didn't look good. But I think that you got to kind of give a little bit of the reasoning why, because he hadn't fought in 2 years. So I think that the ring rust and all those things are absolutely taking place here. I think they're absolutely. But I do think that Vettori can go out there. He can push forward. He can positionally win. He can kind of hold it together. He can kind of, consistently just kind of positionally win. I know I keep saying that, but I do think that's really where he wins this fight here, especially at this plus number here. I am going Marvin Vettori to get the job done plus 170. And the next one here is going to be Vinicius Oliveira. He is minus 164 on the comeback here. We got Kyler Phillips plus 130. Now, I was pretty shocked here that this line did open up Kyler as a sizable underdog. Now, we are seeing that line come in a little bit here, and it's tightening. But I do think there's a little bit of a market overcorrection really on both sides. And you had, Vinicius, who was a big underdog and past couple of fights. He ends up completely outperforming that number. We did cash with him. I think it was a plus 170, if I remember top of my head, against Said Nurmagomedov. We cashed that ticket. And now he becomes a sizable favorite here. And now you look at even Kyler. Kyler was really kind of pegged, fights ago. Pegged is like kind of the next big thing. All these, there was a lot of big talk about him. Even the market was kind of putting him there. If you look at his last 5 fights, he was a minus 280, a minus 400, minus 200, minus 210, and minus 625 against Rob Font. Now, we talk about that Rob Font fight for a minute. I do think there is an overreaction to that fight because I think that's what the market does. They overreact to the most recent thing that they have seen. And whether it was a stylistic thing, a ring rust thing, whatever it may be, the market's going to overreact to that. And if we talk about it for a minute here, the first round, obviously, it was all Kyler. He goes out there, he's getting takedowns, he looks dynamic, he's mixing it up a lot, giving the angles, really just made it tough for Font. I think Font looked very much out of sorts within that first round. Second and third round were a little bit different of a story there. We did have as he's pushing forward, Font, he just has fantastic boxing. He was able to mix it up, really pressure, really land some nice shots. And that really, Kyler, I think a little bit here was overlooking Font, and especially we're talking about, and so was the market when you're talking about minus 600 number here. And I do think that kind of played a little bit of a role there where I think he thought he was going to run through him. Font, a grizzled vet, was able to, withstand some of that, land his own shots, and find the victory. Now, although Font is old, or older, I should say, I think he's 38. He's still a solid fighter. He's now off back-to-back wins, and the only guys that he has lost to since 2021 are Jose Aldo, Marlon Vera, Corey Sandhagen, and Figgy. I mean, we're talking former champions, title challengers, high-level guys, and these are the guys that Font is losing to, but yet he's beating, some fairly good fighters, but, the higher level guys, he's not able to get through that wall. And, now you got a spot here where, it was just too much too soon, I think, or just whatever it may be for Kyler Phillips. And I think that Font was kind of overlooked in that spot. Now, Kyler on your side here, though, when you're looking at him, he's got, very unorthodox striking. He's very athletic. He's very explosive early. And that obviously is a concern here when you're talking about cardio. But the way I kind of look at this, the fact that they both have bad cardio, it's not that Oliveira has some elite level cardio or he's gonna outpace Kyler. I don't really see that happening here. I think that obviously both these guys, I think, will start to slow down kind of at the same pace. And I do like Kyler early in this situation here, looking for these takedowns, looking to bank, that first round. And I like his well-timed takedowns. And I think that he has such dynamic striking, such, versatile arsenal that he can really tuck these really well behind these combinations, find some takedowns. We've seen Oliveira taken down. Yes, he is, definitely elevating some of that, but I do think he can find the takedown, bank some rounds, or work from the outside, land some nice shots from the outside, mix up the combinations. And I think that especially at a plus number here, I like Kyler Phillips here. And you look at, Vinicius, yes, he's going to be, the aggressive guy. He's going to come forward, but he's another guy that I think not very technical, can be very sloppy in the pocket. And I think that Kyler is a sharper striker between the two. I think he's got the better grappling, the better, top game. If this fight does get to the ground, I like what he brings to the table there. And you even got Vinicius, who fights with his hands down a lot. And I think someone is going to make him pay. I think that you've got Kyler, who I think can find the openings to some of those counters here, get the victory. So I do like Kyler Phillips at plus 130 to get the job done. And the last one here we're going to talk about is going to be Francisco Prado. He is minus 140 on the comeback here. We got Nikolai Veretennikov. He is plus 120. Now, the first thing here that we're going to talk about, and I think anyone who breaks this fight down is going to talk about, is the fact that you've got Prado here and he's at lightweight. Now, this guy, he should be a welterweight. I know that that's probably everybody saying that this week. His frame is not really built for the lightweight division. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like that, he just can't make it. He's a shorter guy, but he's kind of stocky and he's struggling making the welterweight, weight, and now he's going to have to get going up and really build up. Now he's 23 years old, so I think that this is the kind of thing that he is going to be able to build himself a little bit better into the division, but he's always going to be undersized. There's no question every single fight he is going to deal with that, and we've seen it already, him having to deal with that, but he has, had some fairly good performances, even in losses, has really, because he's the shorter guy, has struggled with that. Now here, he's going to be 2 inches shorter. Nikolai is going to be 4.5 inches longer in reach. But besides for having somewhat of a striking advantage, I think for Veretennikov, I really just think the frame is really the only advantage that he has. I am very low on the overall skill set of Veretennikov, not impressed with really anything that I have seen from him overall. And, I think the matchup does sit pretty well for Prado. And I think the biggest vulnerability here for Veretennikov is going to be the takedown defense. I think that's very, very clear here. And I think it's a very obvious path here that he can be taken down. He can be controlled. And not only just the fact that he can be taken down and controlled, but he's got absolutely shit get-up game. I mean, his get-up game is terrible. He doesn't really know what to do once he's on his back. I think he pretty much is a deer in headlights and just, is just either going to ride out the round or get finished on the ground. I don't think he really has the knowledge base to work himself back up systematically here. And I think that's opportunities, for Prado to bank some rounds if he can shoot for those takedowns. Now, Prado does have, or doesn't really have, many takedowns. He doesn't really have that. But he's now training at Kill Cliff. We are seeing him over the last, more recently, really shoot for takedowns, go for the takedowns. Now, is he getting all of them? No. But the fact that he's shooting for them here, I think he's going to find opportunities here against Veretennikov to get takedowns, get control time, and find an opportunity to, again, bank the rounds, find a finish. And on the feet, I like Prado's, volume. I think that he can land, really good volume, push forward. He's got the power that he backs behind it. He's going to crash the pocket. He's going to get in your face. And I think the mix between the way he moves forward and throws these big overhands and mixing in takedowns is going to work out well for him, because I think that crashing the pocket, he wants to get inside some of that range. And then also he wants to look for the takedowns. So I think that is the opportunity for him. And then also let's also not forget here the fact that Veretennikov's 35 years old. He just made his UFC debut at 34? He's 0-2 in the organization. He has not looked that great. He has fought very low level guys outside the UFC. And I don't really see much from him here. I think that they have, and again, at 23 years old, you're going to see a lot of advantages. I mean, a lot of elevation here, I think, from Prado, where he's training at, how young he is, and who Veretennikov is at 35 is who he is, or he's going to get worse. So I think this is a spot here where you got Prado. I think he's going to be able to move forward, look for takedowns, land the more impactful shots. So I'm going Francisco Prado to get the job done. So there you have it for my plays for UFC 318. If you want to become a client, link down in the description. And big card this weekend. Really excited about this card, man. Really, really excited about it. I have 4 plays up right now. 5% max bet play. I'm going to have a ton of fucking plays this week because we are cashing fucking tickets. All right? We're cashing. See you next week. That's cash.